As I said, I'm the Chief Investigator at PQIP. I'm also part-time anaesthetist, and my colleague here is Ravi Vora.
So my name is Ravi Vora. I'm an upper GI consultant from Nottingham, and I'm one of the surgical leads for the PQIP study.
Without further ado, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our findings from this year. So before I do, this is going to be a day, I hope, predominantly of celebration and of collaboration, but when you're in a place like this, it's sometimes a bit easy to forget why we're really here. So let's take a moment.
So one of the reasons you sit by the bed is to support the patient in their recovery, but also because you want to support the patient if something needs to happen. But I believe the quote I would take from her first consultation with her urologist here in the UK was that surgery is a very humbling practice, humbling for the surgeon and humbling for the patient. And he didn't promise a solution. He was hopeful he could achieve a good outcome for her. He was disappointed when complications occurred, but surgery isn't a perfect science, it's not a perfect art. Expectations were survival. But survival with the quality of life. As she recovered from the surgery, she did actually come out of critical care. Critical care was just exceptional people, exceptional level of care. She had complications, she developed septicemia, she was moved back to critical care. This is back in May. So was in hospital for a number of weeks, recovered from that. And as I said, everything was going fine until they removed the urethral stents. And that's when they discovered that, as a result of scarring or whatever, that one of her ureters had given up the ghost. So that was an emotional period, because we've gone from the elation of the success of the operation that she survived, back to survival with the quality of life. We were on a journey. This is going well. The stents were taken out. Then it was, we're back down the bottom of the scale, and then that was built up again, until such a point it was realised what the issue was. And that's when further surgery was recommended and required. So that's what we focused on then, was managing, even though it wasn't very pretty and comfortable for her to have nephrostomies and to fly home with nephrostomies. She was referred back for a review in July, which was supposed to be a few days, and she ended up staying for 2 weeks because of her complications. So there was this toing and froing during the summer of 2016. And then we came back over again on the 24th of October for this most recent surgery. At the moment she's doing well, both physically and psychologically. There's further surgery planned early next year, in April. So at that point it is intended that they will put in a permanent colostomy. But she's actually more than resigned to that. She sees that as the best possible outcome, because the urinary work is working fine. So she knows that that's working, therefore that aspect is resolved, and resolving the bowel issues, well, that means that she'll end up where she wants to be, which is surviving and with a good quality of life.
So, now for some stories of challenge and for some stories of success. We're all here because the aim of PQIP is to improve processes and outcomes for patients undergoing major non-cardiac surgery through the use of quality data at local level. And we're measuring systematically processes which have been evidenced to support good quality care, outcomes including complications and longer-term health-related quality of life. Our Year 1 report covered the period between December 2016 and February 2017, and at that point we highlighted 5 potential key national opportunities for improvement. Our Year 2 report covers the care of just over 18,000 patients who had locked records, Year 1 is 6,378 patients, and Year 2, which is about an 18-month period, just over 12,000 patients in 124 hospitals. So the Year 1 report had 71 hospitals in it, and they were all in England. We're delighted that we've now got 124 hospitals, including some in Wales. We hope that Belfast will come on board for Northern Ireland soon, and we're still working to get some Scottish sites on board. In terms of recruitment, so the top, middle and bottom refer to 2017, 18 and 19, and the map is evident in terms of the proportion of patients recruited at each site. What we've seen is a steady increase in recruitment, although we are aware that per site, recruitment seems to have flattened off, which we think is a reflection of the challenges that local teams have with obtaining resources to collect the data, including through local clinical research networks. And we're working with the NIHR to try and bring increased support to you guys to do that. The cohort characteristics of the patients that we've analysed in this data set, they are very similar between years 1 and 2. There's one key difference which relates to the new types of surgery that we've brought in Year 2 of the study. So the median age is 66, they're predominantly male, predominantly ASA 2 and 3. The majority have a cancer diagnosis and are having surgery for some reason for cancer. And then a spread of comorbidities, as you would expect from this population of older patients. This is a graph which is in your report, which shows the proportion of patients by year recruited to different specialties. The big recruitment in the middle is for colorectal surgery, upper GI next, but we've got a steady recruitment across all of the different surgical specialties, including the new ones such as orthopedics, spinal surgery, burns and plastics, gynecology and vascular surgery. These patients are having really complicated major surgeries. So 2/3 of patients are having surgery that lasts more than 3 hours. They are predominantly having consultant-delivered care, and 40% of them are admitted to a post-operative critical care unit after their operations. So we identified some challenges, and some of them really remain challenges in Year 2. So one of the things that I have to say personally I thought would be an easy win was to bump up the proportion of patients that have an individualized risk assessment. And we're going to talk more about this afternoon. But essentially, we've seen a small improvement in hospitals that have been recruiting patients across the whole study. But the hospitals that have come on board more latterly have lower compliance with this aim. And we don't see any clear pattern between objective assessments of risk using the surgical outcome risk tool or PPOSM or other measures, and which patients are admitted to post-operative critical care. And we'll come back to that later. So for me, this is a surprisingly tough nut to crack, and there are reasons why we need to do that, which we'll talk about this afternoon. Anemia management was also highlighted as a potential improvement opportunity, and again, we've seen a very modest improvement in the rates of patients with severe or moderate anemia. But 11% of patients with anemia still are going into surgery with a actual blood loss of more than 500 mils, and so therefore at high risk of having a blood transfusion perioperatively, which we're trying to avoid. And more women than men have moderate or severe anemia, according to the international consensus statement that was published in Anesthesia a couple of years ago. So we this year started collecting some more detailed data on how anemia is being treated, and we haven't put a lot of detail about that into the report because the numbers are still quite low because we've only recently started collecting it. But it would appear that 70% of patients with an anemia, with a hemoglobin of less than 130, do not appear to be having any preoperative treatment. And so we need to have a look at that in a little bit more detail to understand the reasons why that might be. HbA1c measurement is the bedrock, the cornerstone, the starting point of the care of the diabetic patient having surgery. And again, we've seen a very modest improvement in the measurement of HbA1c in the cohort, but nothing like the 100% compliance that we were hoping to achieve. And again, we want to understand the reasons why this might be. It could be a data quality issue at local level that you can't find the HbA1c measurement even if it's been done. Or it could be that patients are attending late for preoperative assessment, for having urgent, maybe cancer surgery, and people are deciding, well, there's no point in measuring it because the patient's got to have their operation anyway. So these, again, are objectives for local data analysis in order to try and understand what the issues might be. Individualised pain management. So for me, this is one of the really, really big opportunities. And we've looked in a little more detail this year at pain that's reported in the recovery ward or within 3 hours of the patient leaving the operating theatre, and then the pain scores recorded at 24 hours using the Bauer Patient Satisfaction Survey. And what we found, which comes as a surprise to me anyway, is this big hike between the proportion of patients reporting pain in the recovery ward and those reporting severe pain within 24 hours. So it's likely to be multifactorial. There may be some patient-related issues, so obviously we're trying to get patients mobilising in that first 24 hours, and mobilisation can be painful. It's interesting to note that head and neck surgery is the one specialty that doesn't appear to have this big jump, and one might hypothesise that mobilising a patient who's had head and neck surgery may be less painful. There may be structural issues, such as staffing, for example. If a patient goes to a normal ward after their operation with an epidural or a PCA and the pump runs out, or there aren't enough nursing staff to give PRN analgesia, you can see that there could be some issues. And there may be some process issues that are more directly within the gift of the anaesthetist and the surgeon to influence, such as, for example, the type of anaesthesia and analgesia that are being both administered in the operating room and also on the prescription charts for afterwards. And I do think there is an important question to answer about what our aim should be. I don't know what the right amount of the right proportion of pain to expect within 24 hours of surgery is, but 1 in 5 patients reporting severe pain seems quite high to me and to the rest of the central PQIP team. But we've had some real successes, and probably the biggest one in terms of process measures is the drinking, eating, and mobilising measure. So you will remember from last year's report, we publish at the back of the report our positive deviance lists, which are the hospitals that are achieving really, really good compliance against some of the measures that we've chosen to highlight. And what's really, really terrific about this year's report is we've had to reduce the font size to squeeze in all the hospitals into the same 2 pages or 3 pages for positive deviance. And this is just the positive deviance list for drinking, eating, and mobilising. And it doesn't matter which way you cut the data up, whether you look at it about the total cohort or by specialty or the proportion of hospitals that are achieving high compliance. There are improvements across the board in drinking, eating, and mobilising, which is really fantastic to see. We've also seen an improvement in post-operative morbidity. So we measure post-operative morbidity using the POMS survey on day 7. And on the left-hand side is all the patients recruited in year 1 and year 2, and the proportion that reported or had post-operative morbidity on day 7. And this is major morbidity. So we've knocked out some of the more minor, potentially trivial types of morbidity that the POMS records. And you can see the green indicates an improvement, and the asterisk indicates a statistically significant improvement. And as Ravi said, I don't want to linger on the statistics. This is an improvement project, but people want to know this type of information, so we've provided it. So generally, we're improving by domain, and we're improving overall. Now, in year 2, we started recruiting patients from some specialties where post-operative morbidity is less common, like, for example, complex orthopedics. So in order to provide a fair comparison, we took out the patients having operations under those new specialties and just compared the patients who are having colorectal, upper GI, head and neck, and so on surgery. So the same specialties we recruited across years 1 and 2, and we still see significant improvements. So that is really, really terrific to note. And probably tied in with that, we have seen, and importantly for the finances, post-operative length of stay is falling. So we've seen a 1-day reduction in post-operative length of stay across the board in the total PQIP population, and we've seen the most marked improvement in those hospitals that have been in the programme for the longest, which sort of agrees with the general literature that improvement takes a while to happen, and therefore you've got to be in it for a while in order to materialise those improvements. So, back of an envelope calculation on a 1-day mean post-operative length of stay improvement. We think about 1 million procedures per year of this major surgery type. Real back of an envelope calculation according to NHS Improvement is that a hospital bed is £313 per day. So that's an annual saving of 313 million if that's extrapolated across the NHS. So it's not quite Boris's prediction, but anyway, perhaps a little bit more realistic. But still, we see the impact of complications on length of stay. So you will probably remember this picture from the first year report. This is the equivalent for the second year, but you can compare the two diagrams in the report in front of you. But the blue circles are the average length of stay by surgical procedure or specialty for patients who don't have a major complication, and the red are for those who do. So you can see the big difference. And then finally, very briefly, this was just really a teaser, and going back to that very poignant video that we've just seen, we are looking at longer-term follow-up of patients, and we've got some preliminary data looking at 6-month health-related quality of life according to the EQ5D survey, and thank you, because we know it's a real effort to collect this data from patients after they've gone home. So thank you for your efforts. So you will see by domain, and again, you can see it in the report, mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain and discomfort, and anxiety and depression. The pale numbers on the right-hand side are the patients who don't have a problem, and then going over towards the left-hand side, increasing amounts of problems between 0 and 6 months, so between admission and 6 months. So you can see, for example, at the bottom, anxiety and depression, only 40% of patients are free of anxiety and depression at baseline, but that goes up to 66% 6 months later. So that's unusual, I would think, for most of these types of health-related quality of life, but of course not surprising, given that these patients are having really very, very significant surgery. These are called alluvial plots, and we've just focused in on pain and anxiety and depression. So each line is an individual patient. So this is several thousand patients across the whole cohort. Pain on the left, anxiety and depression on the right. On the left-hand side is baseline, and on the right-hand side of each graph is 6-month data. So if you're blue, that means you've had no change. If you're red, that means you've deteriorated. And if you're green, that means you've got better between 0 and 6 months. So you can see if you eyeball it, that probably a higher proportion of patients deteriorate from a pain perspective than improve. And if you look at anxiety and depression, probably a higher proportion of patients improve than deteriorate. But for us as clinicians looking after these patients, this provides really interesting data on which we can act immediately if we want to. So for example, if you contact a patient who reports that they have anxiety and depression at 6 months, it's pretty straightforward to ask them if they have sufficient support, and then take it from there. We're using local processes. So what does all this mean? Our interpretation is that improvements are possible, that simple, easily measurable and communicable targets work best, like the drinking, eating and mobilizing. All of this requires time and resources and local support, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. And obviously, we need to provide from the central team perhaps further direction and encourage further collaboration. So that's our priority list for this year. Our infographic rejigged a little bit to focus on preoperative assessment, diabetes pathways, individualized pain management, dreaming, and at the center of all of it, communication and MDT working. We've produced a series of infographics based on data that have been provided to us by teams that are doing really well with enhanced recovery. We've produced some more to give you some additional guidance on managing some of these wicked, tricky problems like perioperative pain and individualized risk assessment. And we want to breed some healthy competitions, so we're going to launch some competitions encouraging teams to send us their improvement projects, their highs and their lows, so that we can publish them in next year's report and publicize them at this event next year. So to sum up, it's really still very, very early days in this project, but we're already seeing signs of progress. The MDT engagement is the critical thing, and that's why it's terrific that you guys are all here today. And thank you very much indeed for your hard work so far. Thank you.